Alright guys, what's up? So I have a new activation for you today. For anybody that hasn't watched these before, maybe if you're new to it, you've just watched a couple. For everyone else that's watched them over and over, bear with me. I always tell everybody, remember, activations, anything I do is nothing written in stone. It's never saying this is the absolute best. Everything is always blending the balance of what's perfect on paper and what are people, including myself, actually going to do in the gym. And I say that because if you really, on a big day, like what I recommend this activation for, so pre-squat, pre-deadlift, any variation of those, you could technically make the argument you're using every single joint in the body. So if someone has neck issues, they might do activations that involve every single motion, every single articulation of maybe the vertebra involved in their neck. And for them, that makes a lot of sense. But for everyone else, do you really necessarily need to do that? If you actually go through every big motion a joint can produce, like for your hip, if you do all the flexion extension, but then you'd have to do all the abduction, adduction, and then you'd have to do all the internal, external rotation, how that joint actually articulates. And you can do that with every single joint. I mean, with your knee, you could do all the flexion extension stuff and then address how it articulates. And on paper, I mean, why wouldn't you do that? It makes a lot of sense. Well, the reason you don't do it is if you do that with every single joint in the body, that's an hour's worth of work possibly. So again, it's always blending the balance of you want to do something, you might not necessarily want to do that for an hour, but there's always something in between. So I always tell people too, I have some days where I'm beat to shit, but I really, maybe for mental reasons more than actual physical reasons, still really want to get to the gym. Sometimes I'll take those as corrective days. That might be a day I do 30 minutes or 60 minutes of activation work. Just take as many joints as I can through full range of motion, spend time there, really get a good internal focus, because I think that's always money well spent. The only downside with all of that is you wouldn't want to do that on a regular basis, because even though contracting muscles in a shortened position isn't very energy system have a whole lot of energy system expenditure, it still does a little bit. So after an hour of it, you might actually fatigue enough that you hinder performance, for your actual training. So the only time that's okay is if I'm really doing a corrected day, I might do half an hour of that stuff, and maybe just hit one movement, normally like a big movement, a deadlift or a squat variation, so I feel like I'm doing something. But for most days, as you guys have seen, it's somewhere between 60 seconds and maybe 8 minutes on the upper end of activation stuff. So for this one's specific to something you could do for any type of lower body or spine loaded day. So any type of deadlift variation, any type of squat variation, any type of leg day, basically this is a great one for. And I make the argument where, so again, outside of specifics, and even for me, like my left ankle, if you guys have watched before, is one of my biggest limiting factors in its function of all the muscles around that foot and that ankle. So I almost always spend some time on that. But for somebody else, you might not need as much time. Again, it'd still be good, but it might not be like your big priority. So I always say, you work from your absolute most important stuff first and then out from there. So if you're going to do a 60-second activation, it's going to be something that's a lot of big bang for your buck. It's probably not going to be one little joint. So that's with anything that's lower body, anything that loads the spine, I really think you want to spend a lot of time around there. So specifically things that affect the spine is obviously core stuff. So stuff that actually attaches around the spine, around your rib cage, around your hips. And then everything that crosses over your hips and attaches to your pelvis, because your pelvis position is a big thing. That's what your spine sits on top of. So that's the big bang for your buck stuff, I think, whenever we're doing that. And that's what this activation really addresses, is all of that stuff. And some of these variations are things I've kind of done before, just subtle variations, but it's different enough from what I've done before that I want to show it. And some of them I might actually like better for some reason. So as always, there's never going to be a point in time where you can't pick anything I've got listed. So if you go to my other leg day activation or squat day activation or whatever it is and do all that, you're definitely going to be better off than if you didn't. But same as everything else, unfortunately, you got to use your brain a little bit sometimes. So if you've watched any of my stuff before, this activation, I might incorporate these three for sure all the time for all my hip and torso stuff. And then I might go put in some ankle stuff as well too, maybe specifically my left side just for me. So what I mean by that is you guys can kind of piece stuff together. If you've got knee stuff, you might go in and do a little bit more stuff, maybe involving your hamstrings or actually involving some, articulation of that tibia in your knee joint like I've showed before. That's where you're kind of doing the windshield wiper ones with the feet. So again, I say all that just to help fill your guys' brains with what hopefully actually produces results, which again is very little ever to do. Just here's exactly the program to follow, the exact warm-up to follow, because you're not an exact replica, of every other person following it. So it's, again, the goal of this is to give as much good information that can help as many people as possible. So the thought process behind this one, and to get a little bit more behind it, so for you guys that want it, listen. If you don't, just skip ahead and watch the ones in my thought process through there. So what are the ones that I'm doing? Why am I doing them? And I'll talk over the video a little bit like always. One of the ones that you're going to see, and I kind of go, this is the order I would probably recommend doing it in, but it doesn't really make a massive difference. And sometimes you can do all of this before you actually start. The way that I very often do my activation stuff is like superset with my warm-up sets. So I might do, my first body weight set, like for this I did it with front squats, my first body weight set, and then I might go do the one that you're going to see, the dead bug variation. Then I might do my next weight, a little bit up bar, or empty bar, 135 or something, and then go do the one that's for rec fem. And then I go do a next warm-up set, and then I go do the one that's for lower back, lats, and all sorts of other stuff, glutes. But that's up to you. So again, I do both. So I go back and forth. But that's another way. Sometimes if time is an issue, I do that in between as well too. So that's a really good way to go about it if you can. So what are these ones all for, and why do I pick the ones that I pick? So the first one, I've showed this one before. This might be the only one you guys have seen completely before. It's just a dead bug variation. Again, I don't remember who made up that term. The dead bug variation has been around for a billion years. Same as anything, man. Like the industry is fucking, abused exercises like this to say that they're the cure-all and the greatest thing in the universe. I think it's a really awesome activation. I think you can also train muscles to actually fatigue, to increase strength, or potentially hypertrophy with this exercise as well too. But on paper, it's not really a great exercise for any one muscle. If you're reaching capacities of what your muscles are capable of, so if you're trying to take your rec fem strength, TVA or oblique strength as far as possible, or hypertrophy as much as possible, exercises that train all of them at the same time are never going to probably be that thing. But that's why I love it for an activation. It makes a whole lot of sense. It gets a lot of stuff going at once, which is the goal, in my opinion, of an activation. So with the dead bug variation, I've said this and I'll say it as you're going over the video, the thing that's getting some of the most load is the rectus abdominis. So you're getting a crunched position, and then you're training that muscle. That it's not important, that position. That's just kind of the nature of the movement of how to load it. So it's not like I'm saying loading a crunch position is important, because you're not going to be in that position when you front squat. But you go into a little bit of a spinal flexion, and you use your torso and your hips as load to make sure that rec fem's contracted the whole time. And then your arms and legs act as basically the way that you're further loading the exercise. So one is your arm and leg, opposite arm and leg extend. The weight of those pulling you into extension makes it harder or more load for your rec fem to actually keep, rectus abdominis, to keep everything locked and still and in place. So the whole goal of the exercise is, once you get your spine set in that initial position, the position that your pelvis is in, the position that your torso is in, all of that should be locked in stone. That is the most important thing. The movement is secondary to add some additional load in different directions. The primary focus of the exercise, if you're doing it for 40 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever, is keep all of that locked in stone using all the muscles that keep that locked in stone. So to expand on that, crunch position loads the rectus abdominis first and foremost. Then as you bring your arms and legs out, one thing is you just get more weight moving away from your torso, moving away from your hips. There's more load essentially pulling your body into extension, pulling your spine into extension. So you just have to produce a stronger contraction from the rectus abdominis to make sure that you're holding it in place. Because you're doing opposite arm, opposite leg, it also causes you to want to kind of corkscrew a little bit. So it wants your spine to kind of turn. So that's really where you're going to kind of fire up internal, external rotators, which is going to be your internal, external obliques, to help keep your pelvis from, your torso from shifting, or your pelvis from shifting. And then also having an awareness of basically controlled abdominal breathing, so you're not doing this rib cage type stuff. Rib cage is locked still, belly button is locked relatively still. If anything, very short motion of the belly button going up and down. Ideally, if you can keep it still, because it's not a super taxing exercise, that's going to involve a lot of TVA and stuff as well too. So the motion, I think, is just great. A lot of, again, bang for your buck for firing up everything you'd call the core, just to get everything, producing some activity and producing some contractions, which again is the goal of doing all that stuff. So that's my favorite for all of that musculature, for rectus abdominis, for TVA, for internal, external obliques. Anything controlling breathing and stuff as well too is going to involve the entire torso. There's not a muscle in there not working. So diaphragm, pelvic floor, all that kind of stuff as well too is going, especially when you can controlling slight, very small controlled belly breathing, not having that rib cage expand and shorten, all that kind of stuff. So the next motion that I would probably go with after that is going to be the 45-degree extension variation. So the reason I do that is it's, I think, one of the best ones you can do for the entire back of your body. And the back of the body, glutes gets a lot of importance, but for some reason spinal erectors take the take the blame of a lot of stuff. Like the only thing that's working more or working as much, just second, a very close second to as much as your hip musculature, is your spinal musculature, everything that holds everything in a position of extension and not letting you come to flexion. So I think it warrants some warm up as well too. So you'll see on this one, I'm using a 45-degree bench to fire up everything that extends my hips, everything that extends my spine, things that help lock and stabilize the spine in place, which is going to be lats and mid and lower traps will be involved as well too, even though that doesn't help really stabilize your spine. And at the same time, having a good static awareness of kind of bracing and firing up the core after that. So what you're going to do is you'll see this one takes some practice. It's not super easy to do. So I like to set my legs, it'll be hard to see in the video, but externally rotated. So that's kind of, if your leg's falling, it's kind of a toes out position. That's going to help bias the glutes a little bit over the hams. So you see when I let myself completely flex over the bench, so I'm flexed at the hip, I'm flexed at the spine. Then from there I contract my glutes first, which you can actually see hopefully in the video. So I contract the glutes and then extend just at my hip. So my spine's not extending yet. So just at the hip till I feel like I got a good strong contraction. And then I slowly extend at my spine. I'm trying to extend to somewhere roughly a neutralist position, doesn't have to be exact. Then once I'm in my close to neutral position, I pack my shoulders, so I contract my lats, because again, if you think your lats, from where they attach at your upper arm into the base of your spine, they're a big spinal stabilizer, so I want them contracting and activating. And then when I'm in that top position, I have the braced feeling of my abs. So it's not a Rex abdominis crunch. It's again that feeling as if someone was going to punch you in the stomach. I try and brace everything in the midsection and then hold everything there for a good 5 seconds. So I'm going to pat myself on the back for this one. This is a fucking sweet activation as far as a lot of bang for your buck and kind of tying a lot of things together. So it's the entire back of your body. It's going to get some hamstrings. It's going to get your glutes big time. It's going to get all of your spinal erectors. Going to fire your lats. And then kind of ingrain that position with the stuff you just activated in the first place of all your core stuff, once that's fired up from the previous one. And same as everything with all of these. If you guys are caught up on how many reps, how many sets, which you guys aren't, that's kind of missing the point. The idea is do as many as needed. So you can go through all of these just one round, take about 3 minutes total, and you're ready to go. For me, I kind of did everything today for 2 rounds, I think it was. So maybe it took somewhere 6-7 minutes or so like that. And you're just putting more time and effort in the ones you need to have more internal focus on. Like this one, if you've never done this before, it's going to take a while. It's going to take some practice. And then I always have an asterisk added that if you've never done this exact thing before, it could actually be fatiguing and take away from your workouts a little bit the first couple times you do it, because it's just a new stimulus. If you've never done that exact motion, that exact sequence, you might have some new stimulus on some stuff you haven't used before, which in my opinion is fine. If for a couple cycles of your workout, it takes away from your output that much, it's worth it for getting better function of everything that's involved in the long term. And then the last one, I'm also going to pat myself on the back for. I feel really good about myself today. Confidence is high. Is another great one for training specifically or activating the rec fem, which I think you could make a strong argument for if there's some idea of balance, and if there's some idea of one just having good quality control over it. People train the shit out of all of their other quads. Anytime you're just doing any knee extension, you're doing leg extensions, you're just training the shit out of your quads, but never really doing anything to bias and train that rec fem. And I think having activity there, good control over that muscle is good. Just not to think about when you're training so much, because it's either there or it's not, in my opinion. But so you have good control and awareness of it, so your body can tap into it when it wants. But also, just like anything else, if it has to meet the capacity. I think it'll hypertrophy and strengthen a lot, first and foremost, on its own, if it's functioning and firing and doing what it should. When you're doing, sorry about that, functioning or firing the way that it should when you're doing the big motion, but it can warrant some isolation stuff just as well, same as any other muscle group. So again, this is in my opinion, if I go through all my parameters of what makes a good hypertrophy exercise, alignment, profile close on this one, but bracing is the big thing I kind of tend to miss a little bit with rec fem. That's the whole point of picking this one. So especially with alignment, especially with bracing, not too bad for profile, but that's just kind of the nature of the exercise, which it would just be a little bit even more of a semantical nightmare to get this one a good profile, but I'll probably do in the future when I'm bored, because it would take a cable. But anyway, so this is the one on the incline bench. The purpose of all this, and the biggest difference between this one and the other ones I've never done before, is the incline bench allows for complete stability. So again, there's something to, you see me do some rec fem stuff where I have to stabilize my pelvis and myself. which again, for an activation purpose, I think is fine. But if you really wanted to load and train the rec fem, I think this would be one of the best exercises for it, because anytime you can use something else to stabilize, it's always a better option. So it's the same as doing, if you imagine trying to do a leg press and getting as much out of your hip and leg musculature as you could without a back pad, it would be useless for hypertrophy. You could argue that you having to hold yourself in there without a back pad in this hip flex position could have some sort of activation purpose, but it'd be a shit exercise for hypertrophy. So this is the same purpose with this one. Is when I'm doing the other ones where I have to stabilize my pelvis, just great for activation, not too good for hypertrophy. So this one can be both. So I like the incline bench, one, because my spine is laying along it, my hips are in the bench, and my spine and hips are still, and all I have to train is hip flexion and knee extension, and that's what the rec fem does. The second thing I like about it as well too is I'm intentionally choosing an incline bench and not a 90-degree bench or higher, because I'm keeping my starting point. So when I flex at the hip and fully extend my knee, my hip flexion. So this is my body, and this is the horrible diagram. Sorry, this is all my budget allows for. I can bring it to just about 90, so I can have a straight leg, with a straight knee. I can hip flex just about to 90 degrees. So if I'm sitting in a 90-degree bench and I'm trying to do this, I'm taking myself right to my end range. I might not actually be able to get there. So I'm setting myself in a position that I can't get to once I actually try and do the motion I'm trying to do. So I sit the bench back. So if I look my torso and my body, from where the seat is and where my bench is, and if this is 90, because I'm doing the incline, I'm a good maybe 30 degrees short of where I can actually take it. So I can actually move my leg to get to that end range position instead of having my body already there and my leg just trying to get there, if that makes sense. So it's that might seem complicated, but it's a very important reason to have that, so you can actually get to your end range with that muscle getting there, not just struggling to actually be there in the start, if that makes sense. Sorry if it doesn't. So they're same as the other ones you've ever seen me do a rec fem activation before. Then once I'm in that position, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my knee first. So that's going to get all of my quads contracting. The rec fem for sure, at least a little bit, even if the other ones are doing more stuff. So all my quads are contracting. And then I go into hip flexion. And the reason I do it in that sequence is if you just hip flex first, then other hip flexors can do the job, or can at least maybe bias more. I think this helps bias the rec fem. It doesn't isolate the rec fem, but it helps bias the rec fem over other hip flexors. So again, because your rec fem is the only hip flexor that is also a knee extensor. So that's the way to bias it. We extend the knee and the hip. And then with the band and the weight of your leg, you're loading both knee extension and hip flexion, which again is another great way, I think, to bias the rec fem to do the most work. So I extend the knee, you'll see, and then I flex the hip to whatever end range that I've got. And the only problem, so again, it's alignment. All that stuff is for alignment to help hit the muscle better. The bench is for bracing, which is why I think it's superior to other ones that I've showed you before, or at least a progression off of it. And the only downside of this exercise is it's a band. So technically, I wouldn't want something. For an activation, you could argue it serves an okay purpose, but for hypertrophy exercise, a band doesn't make sense because it gets heavier to the part where it's hardest. But I'm just picking a load where it's just challenging in that position. So that's what I'm using the band for, is maybe for 5 pounds of pressure is my goal, just enough to challenge that range. A lot of you watching have no business doing any band or anything. You're gonna feel like that muscle's gonna cramp and rip off the bone just doing it with your body weight, which is about the feeling you're looking for, meaning you've never trained that muscle there before. So you see how I kind of adjust my feet. Watch the video close on that. Just so the band's providing, I'm trying to have the band provide X amount of weight, which is 3 to 5 pounds, not a whole lot, so I can get in that position. I can still own that position first and foremost, and then because I can tolerate a little bit of load, I'm putting a little bit of load. Just so you guys know, when I say it could have a better profile, ideally it would be heavier, at the bottom and drop off a little bit. And the way I could do that would be with having a cable in a very specific position where the cable gets closer to my hip and my knee as I go into extension and flexion, which isn't super hard to do. Except the setup of getting the bench in place with the cable, I would have to move a bench over to a cable. I'd have to play around with it for a couple minutes, and I don't have the patience for that 99% of the time, especially in a public gym. So this is great for activation. So I just so you guys know why I say the profile is not great and how you could fix it. Fuck it, I just don't feel like doing that right now. And so you'll see that I do it for both legs. So that's the sequence, and I honestly think of all the big stuff involved, pre-squat, pre-deadlift, this is one of the best. Again, most bang for your buck, some of the most efficient movements that I've done to get all that stuff firing and contracting, and just some good awareness of it. And like I said, I think for sure it's stuff like this. If I have a diagnosable spine pathology, which a doctor would say just because it's his job, I can't train or do things heavy. again, everybody's got that shit. I got people ask all the time, how do I train around also every disc pathology and every type of herniation, partial herniation, bulging, whatever. And I can't ever tell someone what to do for liability reasons, and just because I don't really know internally what that person's got going on, even with a diagnosis. Internally, diagnosis, an actual MRI showing what's going on with the disc doesn't equate to symptoms and doesn't equate to function, and good doctors will tell you that. If anybody wants to really, really dig into spine, I always say Dr. Stu McGill is the GOAT when it comes to spine stuff. And he has a couple great books. I don't remember what they're called off the top of my head. I own one of them, so I should probably know it. But he has ones that for very beginner reader, intermediate, and then for a clinician. So he has one that literally the design of these 3 books, it's all the same book, but one's for a layperson to read, one's for trainers to read, and one's for clinicians to read. So if you're a doctor of some capacity, and they're awesome. So if you really want a deeper understanding, it's a book. It's not me telling you something for a paragraph. It's where I got that information from. So I get people ask me books all the time. When I think of it, I'll say them. So just do this thing called Google, and you'll figure out what 3 books I'm talking about real quick. But anyway, so all that means is what the books will tell you too, and Dr. Stu, he's one of the few people, it's not like, oh, be a pussy, don't do anything for the rest of your life. No, he teaches you how to train and get that musculature strong and up to capacity around your spine, around your hips, so that you can do the things that those muscles are supposed to do. And then, like I said, I use myself as an example. I've got something that's diagnosable that a doctor would say, don't ever do anything heavy again. They literally probably say heavy. And, you know, like I said, I've deadlifted 600 plus since then, so I'm doing all right. And train something loading my spine heavy every single week. So anyway, that's a lot of information. But again, I want to give you guys more information when I got it that I think is of a lot of value. So I really think this is one of my better activations. So here they are. And have at it. And as always, if you got questions, I'm trying to not be such a turd and trying to make sure I'm following up with questions below videos I post as well too. But as always, go to the Q&A. No question in the Q&A will go unanswered. It might just take me a little while because you guys got a million fucking questions now, which is great. You know, and just trying to make sure that I'm getting all through that and content elsewhere. So here you go, guys. Enjoy.